much to Amplify, and thank you so much to Texas Book Festival, and thank you all for being here. It's going to be a really special evening, and I can't wait to dig in with my questions, but I think first, Laekan, weren't you going to read a little bit from your book? Just like a little appetizer, shall we say?
Yeah, I'll just read a little bit from the beginning.
Okay.
So An Appetite for Miracles is a dual point of view contemporary romance, just like all of my other YA novels. I feel like that's sort of my thing in the YA space. So the two protagonists are Danna and Raul. And so even though the book is written in verse, written in poems, it's separated by sections. So we get a section of, poems from Danna's POV, and then a section from Raul's POV. So the book starts with Danna's POV, and the first poem is called Alphabet Soup. When I was little, you fed me alphabet soup. You placed the spoon in my hand, showed me how to swirl the letters, scoop them up. D for Danna, G for Grandpa. I used my tongue to mash the shapes against the roof of my mouth while you sounded out each one. You showed me how to move them like constellations, how to stack them, line them up, jiggling puzzle pieces. You showed me how to ignite their sounds on the tip of my tongue, how to roll them around between my cheeks, chew on them between my teeth. In the bottom of that bowl, we wrote poems. We told stories. And I know if you could just close your eyes, if you could just feel those textures on your tongue, if you could just taste those memories, salty, sour, bittersweet, you could remember me. And then the next poem, the second one that I'll read, is called Shadow Puppets. Mommy's making dinner, which is never a good sign. But Papi's working late tonight, and Mommy's trying to write poems too, to arrange the ingredients just right, using my grandmother's old recipe cards to start a fire in Grandpa's belly, to light the way to his heart. Memories like shadow puppets on the walls of his mind. Hand me the pomegranate, she says, with one hand raised. I watch her break it open, and I remember once Grandpa told me that the apple Eve plucked from the tree of knowledge was probably, actually, a pomegranate. As Mommy sprinkles the seeds on top of the walnut sauce, I pray there is still knowledge in them. I pray. I peer over her shoulder and say, he doesn't like parsley. She doesn't look at me. You can't have chiles en nogada without parsley. It needs to look like the Mexican flag. So he'll remember, I almost hear her think. So that if the ingredients aren't stacked just right, maybe the colors will be the thread, tying him back to when he was a boy. Are you hungry, Dad? Mommy puts the plate in front of him. His spine curves, a question mark. And then I take his hand, help him hold the fork like he helped me hold that spoon. I help him eat Mommy's poem, one bite at a time.
That was lovely. This is such a beautiful book.
Thank you.
It's about family, it's about love, it's about food, and it's about so much. And you can check all three of those things because I laughed, I cried, I was moved, and I also got very, very, very hungry. So I'm wondering if you could talk about, because I know with every book it's a little different when you get that initial idea. So can you talk about the heart spark that led to this book?
So I get asked this question a lot, not just about this book, but about all of them, just kind of what was that spark of inspiration, or what was that initial seed of inspiration? And for me, it's kind of hard to pinpoint. I spend a lot of time collecting information in the Notes app in my phone that I don't necessarily know what to do with the second I type it in. But over time, things start to kind of, coagulate, come together, and I realize, oh, this piece goes with this piece, or this could work with this. And so with An Appetite for Miracles, I spent a couple of years just like collecting things in my phone related to, first and foremost, I think some questions that I wanted to answer, or things that I was maybe struggling with, or things that I had struggled with when I was the character's age. So collecting things around theme, Danna struggles with body image. She and her mom butt heads around this issue quite a bit. Raul has a very strained relationship with his mother. She was wrongfully incarcerated. The beginning of the book, she comes home and they have to kind of figure out this new version of their relationship. And so a lot of those things, I feel like, I sometimes pull from personal places. I sometimes pull from other media that I'm engaging with at the time. And like I said, just all eventually comes together. And I will also say, like, I'm a pantser. So basically, I don't plot my books before I write them. I maybe know a couple of steps ahead at all times, but I'm really a discovery writer, and that's where I find the joy and the fun in writing. And so even once I've collected a lot of pieces of the puzzle, I still sometimes don't know immediately how they fit in it. It's not until I get into the writing process that sort of comes together. So I can't really say like what was the initial seed of inspiration. Just a lot of things. I will say specifically with YA, the core of the book is usually always something that I struggled with when I was a teenager. And I think that's one of the reasons why I'm drawn to YA. My teen years were very, very difficult and tumultuous. And with every book, this is my third young adult book, with every book it's kind of given me an opportunity to examine, a particular trauma from that time and walk these young characters through it in a way that is also bringing me healing at the same time.
Yeah.
So that is something that I can pinpoint with every book. It's like, what part of me is in it, but all of those other pieces, they just sort of happen.
Right, yeah. I mean, we sometimes joke in our family that writing a book is like therapy, except hopefully you get paid instead of you paying someone, because you're working through those issues and central questions. How aware of those central questions are you as you write? Are you just kind of, because you talk about being a pantser, is this sort of an instinct and you start writing Danna or Raul and then you have this sort of aha moment of, oh, I know what I'm tapping into there? Or do you approach the poem knowing that that's what you're trying to work out, or a little both?
More of the first one, because I feel like a lot of my drafting especially is just all about instinct, and just following, what really, when I'm sitting in the chair drafting, like, what is my body telling me while I'm tapping into this moment. And then after that, once I come to the realization of what it is I'm tapping into, sometimes it takes multiple rounds of revision to actually get the courage to really go to the depths that I need to. And I have this process of sort of like circling the pain. And with every revolution, I get a little bit closer to it and a little bit closer to it, until, I'm so far in the revision process that I feel ready to tackle it. But yeah, it's mostly instinct.
Yeah. Working up the bravery, maybe.
Yeah.
I get that. So Danna and Raul have things in common in the book. And could you talk a little bit about what they're both grappling with, you touched on this a little bit, and talk about how they are similar in their problems and just as people. And then if you could you talk about how 16-year-old Laekan is similar to either of them?
Yeah, so I would say their core conflict that they sort of have in common is that they're experiencing this very unique pain of missing someone who's right in front of them. And so with Danna, it's her grandfather who's recently been diagnosed with dementia. And prior, to his illness, he had this very rich and vibrant life. He was a food critic and he traveled all over the world, tasting and writing about different foods. And so food is how they connect, and food is also how she's sort of trying to bring him back to himself, which I feel like is a very, teenager way to approach this sort of problem. She sees that there are certain foods that trigger memories for him. So then she just keeps trying to find those foods that do the trick. And she's not always successful, but she's very determined. And then with Raul, his mother, like I said, was wrongfully incarcerated. So they were out of each other's lives in a big way for about 2 years. And now that she's home, she's very different from the person she was before she left, and has become even more intensely religious, extremely strict. And those were things that obviously helped her cope when she was incarcerated. But now that she's out, there's sort of things that are causing her and Raul to butt heads. And so he just feels like even though she's back in the home, there's all this distance that remains between them. So the second part of your question was like, what aspects of me are in those
16-year-olds, or maybe you now, I guess.
Yeah, well, I definitely think with Danna, I have a very, very close relationship with my grandfather. Up until I was like 2 to 3 years old, my mom and I, we lived with my grandparents, and my aunt, my 2 cousins, all of us together in this 3-bedroom house. It's very chaotic, and I would spend summers with my grandmother, or my grandparents after we moved out of the house. So I just spent a lot of time with them. And my grandfather was like my first father figure. I never knew my biological father. He wasn't in the picture. And my adoptive father didn't come into the picture until a little bit later in life. And so he was the first father figure in my life, and we have a very special relationship. And so there's a lot of moments in the book that come from that relationship and specific memories that I have of him. And I also, not just with Raul's tumultuous relationship with his mother, but Danna has a tumultuous relationship with her mom in the book too. That was something that I also dealt with when I was a teenager. I'm an only child, and my mom had me when she was very young, and we're just complete opposites. And when I was growing up, we would just butt heads a lot, and it took many years for, I think, us to both accept that we are different people, and that you can, to find a new way to like love one another and have a closeness that doesn't hinge on how alike we are, and that celebrates our differences more than sort of like nitpicks at them. So I think those are 2 things that are present in these characters for sure.
I noticed at the dedication, you dedicated it to Marcelino. Is that your grandfather?
Yes, and there's a funny story about his name. So maybe about 3 or 4 years ago, I went home for Christmas. So I'm originally from Lubbock, Texas. So my partner and I, we went home for Christmas break. And while we were there, I asked my grandparents to help me make a family tree. I had made an account on Ancestry.com, and so we were just, filling in like the information. And I was showing them like the little leaves that pop up that are attached to documents, and you can kind of expand the view and see whatever they found, what the website found. And we were building the family tree, like Marcelino popped up as married to my grandmother, and we were all like, who is that? Because that is not the name that my grandfather uses. My mom and her siblings had never heard him use that name. They weren't aware of that name. And it turns out, and this is very common, it was a very common thing to happen in the United States, especially in Texas. When my grandfather started school, his, Anglo teachers made him change his name from Marcelino to an Anglo-sounding name. And he just kept the Anglo-sounding name, for the rest of his life, through his adulthood. And that's the only name his grandchildren and his children knew him by. And so the dedication in the book is, I think it, has a double meaning. It also, this book in and of itself is a way of paying homage to him, but also just printing his birth name in the book was important to me because it was something that was taken from him. Like so many other aspects of our cultural identity were taken from us. And I know that so many, Chicanos who've been here for multiple generations can relate to that. And it was just sort of my way of taking a piece of it back.
Yeah, reclaiming and
yeah.
So have your family read the book and responded to the dedication? And
I don't know if they've read it. When I was growing up, my mom read to me a ton, but like the people in my family, the adults in my family, they weren't really big readers. And so I think more than anything, what excites my family members and especially my grandparents is just being able to like go into the Barnes and Noble and get my books off the shelf. I think in the beginning, maybe my debut they read, but I don't know if they've read any after that, which is okay with me because they're very personal. And I never, just knowing, I think certain people in my family would recognize themselves in some of, if not the characters, in some of the situations in my books. So maybe it's better if they don't. So I'm not checking up on them. Like, I'm not encouraging it,
Right.
I'll just be like, it releases on this day. If you want to go get it, you can. And then I never follow up. Yeah. It's just safer that way, I think.
Well, I think this book is also such a love letter to the cuisine of your culture, of the region. And can you talk about what that has meant to you, and did you have to do research for the book and like, I have to go to this bakery because, research. And can you talk a little bit about, well, actually it's in all your books, right?
Yeah, so food, is in all of my books, but I have had to do a lot of research. My grandmother does not like to cook. She's never liked to cook. And so there were a few like traditional dishes that she would make, and that was really it. My aunt, on the other hand, is a really amazing cook. And so I feel like being at her house, I was exposed to more than I was at my grandparents' house. But I feel like I mostly grew up eating what I would call like campesino food, like food that is very simple in the number of ingredients. It's very portable. Whatever my grandpa could take to the farm is what my grandmother would make, and that's what we would eat. So, like mashed red beans in a tortilla, or even just like a hot dog weenie in a tortilla, or a piece of bologna in a tortilla. Like very, very simple, humble food. But so there were a lot of things that I had to do research on. There were some dishes that I grew up eating that I attempted to make myself for the first time when I was writing my debut. I tried to make menudo by myself for the first time. It's so much work. It's real, and my house smelled like bleach for days. Like my house is not big enough, I guess. So there were a lot of things that I tried to, just teach myself more about, because I think that I had only engaged in them in sort of like a passing way or like a superficial way growing up, just not really being mindful of what was going on in the kitchen or what was being prepared and why. So yeah, all my books have given me an opportunity to dive deeper into that.
Yeah, I feel that way about my family. Like, you know, when a lot of times these recipes weren't even written down. So if someone dies and it's not written down, there goes the recipe, you know, and so you almost have to just do your best to recreate it. So I have kind of a silly question for you. And then I have actually a lot more questions, but I'm gonna just have one more, and then I'm gonna see if there are questions out there. If there's not, I have more. But I was wondering if, because the food is such a wonderful, it's a motif as well. It's a love language. It's just, it's so poetic the way you write about it. And then there's like adventure where it's like she's seeking, you know, it's like a Nick Cage movie. Like we're gonna go and try and find food and bring back my grandfather. If you could, say at a restaurant, maybe your own, if you could create a menu for this book, like a menu that is themed on this book, what dishes would be on it? What would you put? And it doesn't have to be what's in the book. It can also be just stuff you ate while writing.
Oh, okay. Gosh, so this is where I guess I talk a little bit about the sauce of publishing for a minute, because like I finished writing this book. Well, let me back up. When you sign a contract with a publisher and you sell them a book, it usually takes about 2 years from contract to publication and it being on an actual bookstore shelf. And so it has actually been many years since I wrote this. And I don't, like, you ask me about sort of specific details, I'm like, I don't know.
I get it. Well, maybe it can be a Laekan themed menu then.
Yeah, I mean, Danna and her cousin Victoria are cousins and best friends in the book, and they have this obsession with tacos that I think matches my own, so it would have to be probably al pastor. I like pineapples on mine. I know that's controversial, not everybody does, but I do. And then, you know, coconut is like a recurring flavor in all of my books because it's my grandfather's favorite flavor of dessert. So something coconut for dessert. And yeah, that's all I can think of right now.
What do you snack on when you eat, when you write? Like, do you have like the...
I don't snack when I write.
You have more willpower than me.
That doesn't mean I don't use food as a reward. I definitely do. But usually, like, when I hit certain milestones in a manuscript, like, I'll take myself out to dinner, or if I get a new book deal, like a new contract, I'll take myself somewhere. But yeah, I don't really snack.
Good
when
for
I'm
you.
writing.
Good for you. I probably do too much. It's also a procrastination method sometimes. So does anyone have questions for Laekan? Yeah.
Hi, Laekan. My name's Jose.
Hi.
You said that this was your third book. I'm always so curious to hear about a writer's life and their journey as a writer. I'd love to hear a little bit about how the way you look about the world as a writer has changed now that you've completed 3 books as compared to when you were working on your first one. Maybe even in your early days, when you were first thinking about pursuing writing professionally.
I would say it took me about 10 years to figure out the types of books that I wanted to write. I wrote my first novel when I was 17 and a senior in high school. And then after that wrote 7 more what I call practice books over that next decade. And then got my first book deal in 2019 when I was 28 maybe? I don't know how old I am. I'm not good at math. But it took about 10 years of me like writing practice novels in all of these different genres, trying basically like mimicking the kinds of things that I was writing, which I think is something that a lot of writers do in the beginning when you're trying to just learn craft before you sort of hone your own craft. So I spent a lot of years doing that, and then I think once I started teaching, so I was a 9th and 10th grade high school ESL teacher. Once I started teaching, I think just instinctually I felt like, okay, I'm writing these. Previously I was writing sort of younger teenage characters, or even up to like 18, 19, but in what I thought were like adult novels. And so I think I just used that time to get more familiar with the young adult space and realized that my voice was a good fit for that, and a lot of the topics and themes that I was trying to tackle were a good fit for that. And so I think over the years it's just been a process of like familiarizing myself with my own like goals as a writer, what exactly I was trying to say, and then also familiarizing myself with the market in general and where would I fit. And that's sort of how I came to writing YA, that it just felt like a natural fit. The things that I was writing about, again, were, especially in the beginning, mostly about how difficult my own teenage years were and why it was just a good place to process that. But it was also, I realized that it could be for the benefit of like actual teenage readers, which felt good.
Were you already a poet? When did you discover poetry?
I don't even consider myself a poet, which I probably shouldn't say that out loud because this whole book is poems. So my first 2 novels are prose, but this novel, this is the last novel that I wrote when I was still in the classroom. In my last year of teaching, and these are some of my old coworkers in the front right here, my last year of teaching was really stressful. And it was a stressful time for everyone. I mean, I taught in that spring semester that we all went into lockdown for the first time. And then just other things that had happened that school year that were really stressful. And I think poetry is just a perfect vehicle for like the traumatized brain. It really is. Like when you don't have the bandwidth to, write a whole paragraph about what you're feeling, or you can't process in long form, there's something about poetry that just feels really safe. And so I feel like that, again, instinctually, I just was drawn to it. Also, with my 10th graders, I taught the Poet-X every fall, and I don't know if any of you have read the Poet-X by Elizabeth Acevedo, but after about 3 years of doing that same novel study with students and taking them through the process of writing their own poetry, I think that played into it too. So I was inspired by that book. There's a lot of similar themes in this book that there are in the Poet-X. And yeah, so it all just came together, like I was really stressed, but I still wanted to write. Poetry felt accessible. And then I had, been spending so much time with this novel and wanted to try to emulate it in some way.
Well, you did a beautiful job.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Yeah.
Can you tell us some of your favorite books, either from like forever or just in the past year or 2 that you've read?
So my favorite author is Melina Marchetta, and she's an Italian-Australian author. Jellicoe Road, the Lumatier Chronicles. She writes across genres and age categories as well. And I don't remember how old I was, maybe 13, when I discovered her first book on a library shelf. And when I saw her last name at 13, I thought, oh my God, she's Latina. And there was just something, it was such a rarity at that time that's why I picked up the book. And she's not Latina, but the things that she was writing about, it turns out the Italian community, especially the Italian immigrant community in Australia, in the time period she was writing about was heavily discriminated against. I felt like there were a lot of just a lot of things I recognized in those
Right.
characters' stories. So she is my favorite author. The highlight of my debut novel coming out was having her blurb it, because she's kind of, I don't want to say like, recluse is not the word, but like she's just a very private person, and I really did not expect for my editor to hear back from her, for me to get a blurb from her. But I wrote her, a letter when we approached her about it, and basically just told her, your books are my soulmates. And, I feel like that did the trick. And so she wrote me a very nice blurb. And so she is someone that I always recommend. A book that I'm rereading right now, because I'm working on a project right now where these characters are in a book club, and I'm trying to incorporate books from the current Latinx literary canon. And so a book that I'm rereading right now that I really, really love and I feel like has not gotten enough attention is Lulu and Milagros' Search for Clarity by Angela Velez. And it came out in 2022, I think last year. And it's a coming of age story about two sisters who are polar opposites. One is straight A's, has a 10-year plan, very serious, studious person. And the other sister is on a quest to lose her virginity as fast as possible. So it's just, the voice is so spot on and hilarious. And yeah, so I recommend that one too.
I'm wondering, as a former educator, what the experience is like to go into schools and share your books with students.
I mean, it's definitely one of my favorite parts. There's definitely so much that I miss about being in the classroom, and especially as an ESL teacher, I had a unique experience in that I would have my students for multiple years in a row, and I would also have them for multiple class periods every year. So we would spend a lot of time together. And I miss those relationships a lot. And even though when I'm doing a school visit, I'm just kind of in and out and in a day, and I don't necessarily get to stay for long periods of time, I still just really cherish when there's a little bit of downtime and I get to have a conversation with a student, or maybe they pair me with someone who's showing me around, and sort of like a student handler, and I get to know that student a little bit better throughout the day. That stuff is really meaningful to me, and especially when I get to visit schools that have a very diverse student population, a large Latinx population. Something that I worked on this year that I didn't get to deliver the books in person, but my mom delivered them for me a couple of weeks ago, was my family and I, we spent 8 months collecting books, copies of my middle grade novel that came out last year, for all of the 3rd through 5th graders at my old elementary school. And my old elementary school is 95% BIPOC student population, 100% of the students are, low income. So it just...
Is that here in Austin?
No, it's in Lubbock.
Oh, in Lubbock, okay.
Yeah, which is why I couldn't be there
Right.
in person. But so even if I'm not doing a school visit, which I did do a school visit with them in the fall, but it's so important to me to do those kinds of things. And so right now we're trying to collect books for the K through 2nd graders of my picture book that came out in February. And so hopefully at the end of next school year, I'll be able to deliver those in person.
That's wonderful.
It's also a very small school, so it's not a huge, challenge to do it. So I've already done the math. I'm how many do I need to buy each month to be able to have enough for them all at the end? And so, yeah, so I try to prioritize that when I can.
So to piggyback on the last couple of questions, which book, because you talked about, for a long time there were not Latinx authors, really. There was very few, especially in children's YA, there were very few in the canon. And what was the first book where you recognized your culture that you read?
Probably Esperanza Rising by Pam Munoz-Ryan. And actually, it hasn't been announced yet, but I just sold something to her editor at Scholastic. So that was surreal. And when I had the Zoom call with her and like seeing all of Pam's books behind her, and just knowing like those were the only books on the shelf when I was, like elementary age, like when you are sort of developing an autonomous relationship with books and realizing, I think sort of realizing like what you were seeing and not seeing in terms of, or what you were relating to and not able to relate to, and what was missing from the shelf and what was there. And yeah, so I feel like those books are just sort of seared in my memory in a way that not many books are. So that's really exciting.
And now you're doing that.
Yeah.
For readers. How are we doing on time? Do you have a question?
You do so much to give back to the community through Latinx Kid Lit Book Festival and your debut author boot camp. And
Thank you for plugging all of those things.
What has been your favorite wisdom to impart in your endeavors?
So I would say, gosh, that's hard.
Sorry.
I think something that I find really valuable right now, or that I'm really passionate about right now, is teaching other marginalized authors how to advocate for themselves or be better advocates for themselves. So I have a debut author boot camp, and it's basically for debut authors or authors who are out on submission for the first time, so in anticipation of selling their first book, and just teaches them all about what they can expect sort of from the logistical and business side of publishing. And there are so many additional hurdles when you're a person of color, when you're marginalized in any way, and something that adds an additional layer of, that adds an additional hurdle on top of that is that so many of us come into this industry with this attitude of, well, I can't make waves, I'm just grateful to be here, it was so hard to get here, I don't want to do anything to jeopardize that opportunity. And that ends up putting us at such a disadvantage. And so trying to help other marginalized authors get rid of that mindset, and even if it's just helping them script the language they need to use when they're responding to an agent or an editor about something, or just giving them the tools to ask for what they need, to set healthy boundaries, that's really important to me, and something that I think is really critical to making it possible for marginalized authors to be able to do this full time and have long careers.
Yeah, I appreciate you doing that and creating a community for other writers, which also Texas Book Festival does. I think there was a question. Did you have a question?
Yeah. So I believe you already talked about the theme of food. It's actually in all three of your YA books, but so is music.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering if you want to expand on that and how you come up with how that's going to be in your books. I know it's the main thing in Heartbreak Symphony.
Yeah. Heartbreak Symphony is all about music. It's about two musicians who have terrible stage fright and are terrified of chasing after their dreams. The music piece is, I have lived with a musician for 15 years. My partner is a musician, and we have lived in the tiniest apartments together, and where I'm on one side of the couch on my laptop, working on a manuscript, and he's on the other side, working out a chord progression. And yeah, that's just, been my life for a long time. And so it was also easy to have like a live-in resource, and I could just turn to him and be like, how would a musician talk about this? What kind of language would they use? Things that just make the story feel more authentic. Same thing with the restaurant setting in my first book, Somewhere Between Bitter and Sweet. He's the one who worked in a restaurant. It wasn't me. When we were in high school, he worked in a restaurant for many years, and he just always had the most hilarious stories of what all of the employees would get up to. And I liked that dynamic. I wanted to explore it more in a book. And so when it came to like how the employees talk to each other, like the language that exists in a restaurant, the sort of pranks and things they would get up to, like that is all coming from him. And some of the scenes in Somewhere Between Bitter and Sweet are like exact copies of things that happened when he worked at the restaurant. So when I say these stories are like personal, like I take from, if you're close to me, I'm taking something from you, whether you want me to or not.
Well, you've talked about how you just collect these little things
Yeah.
and then put together like the patchwork quilt and stuff.
Yeah, even now, if he cracks a joke that is just like really, really funny, he's like, what are you going to do now? Write it down in the notes app in your phone? Because sometimes I will steal his jokes and put them in books. But one of the themes in An Appetite for Miracles, and one of the things that the characters, say about each other, or I can't remember if it's Raul who says it or if it's Danna who says it, but just that like it really is such a privilege to live life with someone else, to have someone else witness your life. And when you get to a certain age and maybe you're struggling to remember things that happened 10, 20, 30 years ago, you have someone there to fill in the gaps for you. And that's how I feel about my partner. First of all, I don't have a really great memory, but he remembers a lot. He has a really great memory. And, he remembers things about my childhood. Like, how special is that? That, like, my partner is safeguarding my childhood memories for me. And that when I can't access them myself, like, I have someone I can ask or, to reminisce with. I think it's especially meaningful since when I was a teenager, my dad passed away. And, there's things about my dad that he remembers. And if I were to, if we were to break up and if I were to meet somebody now, like they wouldn't have we wouldn't have that same history. And so I really value that history.
You'd have to sit him down and say, okay, let me get you caught up. Yeah. So that's great. That is, and I think it's Danna. That's a beautiful, beautiful
Yeah.
scene where she talks about sort of safeguarding the memories, and you really capture her mission to do that for her grandfather so beautifully. And I have to know, is there a recipe for sugar-free banana split cookies? Because I'm gonna need it.
Yeah, if you Google it. So in the original draft, I had recipes between each section break, and my editor wanted to take them out. I think because the book was ending up too long, and one of the technical things that the editor is worrying about is the cost to print. And so sometimes they, need to cut down on page count just to save money. So that was one of the things that we got rid of.
Well, you
But
should put it online or some, the menu, the playlist, the
So
the recipes.
there's on thenovel.com, which is the Little Brown Books for Young Readers. They're like YA blog. They did have me create a post of some of the restaurants that are featured in the book here in Austin. So if you wanted to go visit any of them, I think I mapped out 4 of them that you can check out.
You can have a little tour.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be good. We just get on a bus and I'll go.
Should have thought of that.
Okay, are there any other questions? Yeah.
I was wondering, because you were sharing how personal your work
feelings and traumas. How do you work through that when you run into it? And you're saying that you kind of circle around it. Do you ever transition to work on another project or another book, or what is that process kind of?
So, now out of necessity, I am usually working on more than one thing at a time, just because I have to publish multiple books a year to be able to continue doing this full time. But I don't necessarily like use that as a way to procrastinate when things are difficult. Usually what I'll do is within that same manuscript, go back and reread it from the beginning. And just continuing to come back to that spot that is a little tender, like a little hard to face, and just, maybe writing the scene that comes after it, like getting as close to it as I possibly can with each revision, or even just putting in a placeholder and being like, here's what needs to happen here, but I'm not ready to go there yet. And so then I'll just continue. But I usually can only make so much progress before I have to go back and write it. Because I'm not really one of those writers who can jump around to different scenes. I really need to write in chronological order. And so something else that helps sometimes is reading books with similar themes and reading how other writers have tackled those issues, and just, maybe at first just reading on an emotion level, how does this make me feel? How am I reacting to this? And then reading again and looking a little bit closer at technical things, like what kind of language are they using? What is the pacing like in this section? And just taking those tools back to whatever I'm working on. But I think ultimately, especially writing in the YA space, writing for teens gives me a lot of courage. And I think helps me be brave, because I know that it's to the benefit of someone else. And I really just want to give teens, not just stories, but tools that I didn't have, support that I didn't have when I was their age. And so I think also if you have a goal for your work that's bigger than you, that can also give you the courage to kind of write through those hard things.
That's lovely. I think that should be our closing statement. That was beautiful. So you will sign books. I want to thank Amplify for having this event, and I want to thank Texas Book Festival, and I want to thank all of you for being here. But can we have a round of applause for Laekan? Thank you so much.
Thank you.